Hello Raptors fans and welcome back to Raptors Report. Ooh boy, do we ever have a great game to cover today. The Toronto Raptors played last night against the Sacramento Kings and they won 131-128 in just a very exciting overtime game. Lots of really fun performances, a lot of drama, some of it unnecessary drama. So without any further ado, let's jump right in and talk about it. It was Vince Carter's banner raising ceremony. And I know that there's still a lot of acrimony and hard feelings towards Vince Carter. And I am right there with you. Booed the guy when I attended games, kind of held a grudge against him for a long time. But watching him last night, I got a little emotional. I thought that he did a great job handling everything with class and dignity, and he addressed all of the things that I wanted him to address. The whole production, the videos, the tributes, everything was done with such class and aplomb. It really reflected well on the franchise, and then the banner itself looked great. I think that the Vince Carter banner that they raised into the rafters, if all of them are like that, I would be very satisfied. It was a nice mix of being classy while at the same time looking visually appealing. I know there's a lot of franchises that have very simple just numbers with the name of the player and then the name of the organization. I know the Celtics do that. But having the picture of Vince Carter in an iconic pose next to the number and everything looked great. I thought Vince Carter showed the right amount of class, and you can tell that this city does mean something to him. And while it was sort of bittersweet, him leaving didn't leave a good taste in everybody's mouth. Watching him up there being honored and having all of his teammates come and pay tribute to him, you could tell that he really does have a special place in his heart for Toronto, and there's a reason why he is entering the Hall of Fame as a Raptor. So yeah, I have good feelings towards him, and welcome back to the fold, Vince. Take your deserved place in the rafters of the Air Canada Centre, the Scotiabank Arena. Let's go on to the game, because this one was a really fun one. The Toronto Raptors took on the Sacramento Kings, and right off the bat, as soon as I saw that they were starting Doug McDermott, and that brought a little smile to my face, because I knew that the Toronto Raptors were going to get a ton of scoring opportunities. There was an advanced statistic that showed that Doug McDermott is the worst rotation defensive player in the NBA for like the past 5 years. When he was on the Spurs, Pop said that, like, dang, you can shoot, but you are the worst defender I've ever seen. So I knew it was going to be a high-scoring affair. I knew that the Raptors would get a chance to put some points on the board. I knew it was going to be a fun game, and it did not disappoint. Both teams, I think the Sacramento Kings are definitely the type of team that the Toronto Raptors like to play against. They don't have a ton of size, which means that they can attack the rim. They have a bunch of really athletic players on the Raptors, and they have a bunch of guys that like to get out and run. And the Kings are also a back-and-forth, up-and-down team. They like to get out in transition, but I think that plays into the Toronto Raptors' hands. The Raptors struggle in the half court. I mean, their offense has actually been decent this year, especially since RJ has returned. I think their offense has looked pretty good, but they're definitely a much better team in transition. So when you start to trade buckets with the Toronto Raptors and allow them to put points on the board, get some confidence going, like against the Lakers, the first half of the game and the first quarter, really, the Raptors couldn't get anything going because the Lakers get back in transition. They don't allow you to push the ball very much. They have Anthony Davis waiting for you at the rim. Rim defense is much better. And then they have Jackson Hayes off of the bench. He's also a big guy. It's hard to get into the paint and finish. Against the Kings, with Sabonis as their only good big man, you can get a ton of shots around the rim, and the Raptors did. I know Barrett kind of strolled into the paint almost every possession, and while I think this was one of his worst games at converting layups, he got so many opportunities just because he was able to get to the basket. In terms of the defense, I think there were a couple of good individual defensive performances, like Davion Mitchell did a really good job guarding DeMar DeRozan, especially in the first half. Ochai Agbaji was effective whenever they put him on Fox or Monk. And then on the inside, Yakob Purtle, when he wasn't being called for a foul on Sabonis, which was like almost every possession, he was kind of eating his lunch. Yakob Purtle had a block on Sabonis. He kind of bottled him up. Sabonis likes to play bully ball. He's very strong. He's very thick and muscular. He will use his body like a battering ram to just ram it into you to try and get through to the basket. But against Yakob Purtle, who's a much bigger player and heavier, he can't really do that as much. So he did a good job when he wasn't being called for a foul. And I will do it again. I'll complain about the officiating again, because last game was against the Lakers, and we all know how that goes. They get a gazillion free throws no matter what the circumstances. But last night, when it comes to Sabonis, it seems as though the rule book just does not apply to him. He's allowed to hook guys with his elbows. He will turn and spin and just ram his elbows into whoever is in the post. He can travel. There was a very obvious charge where I believe it was Mogbo was waiting in the paint. He just bowled him over, ran him over. Easiest charge call ever. No call, play on. Mogbo was handling the ball. He was about to get on the fast break, and Sabonis just literally just ran into him. No call. He was in the post against Yakob Purtle, traveling. He was shuffling his feet, trying to get a better post position against Purtle, and Purtle reached in to try and disrupt the ball, and instead of calling the travel, they called the foul on Purtle. The rest of the Kings, I think the game was refereed pretty fairly. It wasn't that bad, but against Sabonis, it's like he's playing a different sport, like with different rules that apply to him and don't apply to other players. Very, very annoying, but in the end, it turned out that the Toronto Raptors did just enough to win the game. The bench played very well. The bench played really well. They came in and rescued the Toronto Raptors a number of times because both teams were on a back-to-back. The Kings at the end of the game were visibly tired. And the Toronto Raptors, because their bench gave them such a lift, I feel like they had much better legs throughout the fourth quarter and in overtime. DeMar DeRozan kind of saved the bacon of the Sacramento Kings, and he did his clutch thing, and he missed a couple of shots down the stretch, but in general, it was kind of the DeRozan show toward the end of the game, and he really kept them afloat. But there were a bunch of great performances on both sides, and unfortunately, for the Toronto Raptors, there were a bunch of lowlights towards the end of the game that allowed the Kings to get back into it and eventually tie it, send it to overtime, and almost retie the game, send it to a second overtime. So we'll go into that. Why don't we get into the player evaluations right now, because I want to segue here. RJ Barrett, we'll start with him because he has really been the star player for the Toronto Raptors, and they go as he goes, and he has been really just a force for the Raptors. This was his third straight 30-point game. He has been burning up the stat sheet. He has looked great and really carried the Toronto Raptors on offense. So please take what I'm going to say about him with a small grain of salt, because if you keep doing something really good over and over and over again, the standards are being raised. You're not overachieving anymore. You are just achieving at the level that you're supposed to be. Everybody sets that as the benchmark, and then now you're expected to do that. Now everything else is on the table to talk about. So we got to talk about the end of the game with RJ Barrett. So he was doing a good job getting into the paint, distributing. He was kind of playing the point guard position for the Toronto Raptors and distributing, doing a good job in that aspect. And I understand why Darko went to him down the stretch. So toward the end of the game, he missed a crucial free throw that would have put the Raptors up by 3. The Kings came down to the end of the floor. They gave it to DeMar DeRozan. And if you're asking DeMar DeRozan to put 3 points on the board, that's kind of a big ask. If you're asking him to put 2 points on the board, that's a pretty easy ask for him. And he managed to tie the game and send it into overtime. Darko put the ball into his hands again, and he got fouled, and he needed to hit 1 free throw in order to put the Raptors up 4, put the game out of reach for the Kings. And he missed both free throws, and the Kings had a number of opportunities to tie. And to be honest, they kind of got swindled out of possession of the ball. Looked like it went off Grady Dick at the end, but the Raptors quickly inbounded the ball. There were no challenges left for the Kings, so the Raptors managed to squeak one out. But I want to discuss why Darko gave the ball to RJ at the end of the game instead of somebody else who maybe is a better free throw shooter. So Davion Mitchell got the ball at the end of regulation. They threw it down the court towards the Raptors basket so that they could actually get the ball in bounds because Sacramento was trying to foul. And he nearly dribbled the ball off of his foot, or I think he did, but then grabbed possession back. It was like a heart in your throat moment. And you don't want to give him the ball. And it's a different reason. It's not that you don't want him shooting free throws. He's a pretty good free throw shooter. It's because he's not a good ball handler. Ditto with Grady Dick. And I think that as he continues to grow, Grady will become a better ball handler. But right now, I don't think he's at the level as a ball handler to be able to handle the ball while being blitzed by two people, because that's what they're going to do. The Kings are going to bring two to the ball, and they are going to try and overload you and try and create a turnover. And a turnover is much worse. Like a live ball turnover is a fast break dunk. That's even worse than missing two free throws when you can get your defense set. That's like a nightmare scenario. And RJ Barrett is clearly the best ball handler on the floor. So I get it. Like, I understand, don't give him the ball if he's not very good at free throws, but there's not really a ton of other opportunities. Like, who else are you going to give the ball to? So that's kind of why I was thinking about it. But other than that, RJ Barrett continues his very, very impressive scoring streak. He had 31 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, a steal, only 2 turnovers. He was 3 for 9 from 3, 10 for 26 from the field. So not the most efficient evening, but he got the job done. He is carrying the mantle, carrying the water for the Toronto Raptors on offense. He's doing the lion's share of the work of running the Raptors offense and scoring for them. And I think as a player, you're going to start to see more people really appreciate in the national media what he brings to the table, because he's evolved as a player and he's changed in my eyes. Because you look at him and you think, okay, off-ball wing, he can shoot a little bit, he's a complementary player, he's a guy who could maybe raise your ceiling on offense, do a little bit of the extra work with the ball in his hands if he's required. But now when you look at it, I'm starting to see him as a point guard. I'm starting to see him as a guy who you can just give the ball to and get him to make stuff happen, use screens, do all of that kind of stuff that you expect a lead guard to do in the NBA. Really pleased with the way he's developed, and I hope to see more of it. Moving on, we will go to Grady Dick. And Grady Dick, he had a good game. Don't get me wrong, but he did miss a lot of shots. He had 22 points on 6 for 17 shooting. He was 3 of 8 for 3, which is good, and he hit 7 free throws, which definitely helped push his stat line up. He was getting into the paint quite a bit. He had 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, and 3 turnovers. My takeaway from this game was that he kind of struggled with the shot, but he hit the shots when it mattered. I mean, he did miss some shots down the stretch, but he did hit a huge shot at the end of regulation to keep the Kings at bay. They were making a run. Grady hit a big 3. And then in overtime, he had a very nice layup in the lane, and he did just enough on that end to make me smile. But the big takeaway was the defense, especially in the fourth quarter. They were really trying to isolate against Grady Dick, which has been a recipe for success that teams have been using against the Raptors, is literally just find whoever Grady Dick is guarding, give them the ball, and try and put him into pick and roll coverage or into isolation coverage. And the Kings were doing that. Here's the difference, though. He was hustling and he was moving his feet, getting between his player and the basket. When players were trying to blow past him, he was getting his hand on the ball, poking it loose. He created a number of turnovers that way. He also read the scouting report, and when he was guarding DeMar DeRozan, Jonathan Mogbo had an issue guarding DeRozan because DeRozan, as everyone knows, is a pump fake artist. If you leave your feet even for a second, he is exploiting it. What Grady Dick would do is guard DeMar closely, and when DeMar turned around for the shot, he would move in with his hands in the air and just contest the shot. If it goes in, you tried your best, but he didn't try anything extra. If you try anything a little extra on DeMar DeRozan, if you lean in even a little bit, he is taking you to the cleaners and going to the line. And he did not bite on any of the pump fakes. So kudos to him for reading the scouting report and being prepared for that matchup. So I think he had a good game, especially showing me those flashes on defense, where he can be a guy that you can keep on the floor in clutch situations where you're not just hemorrhaging points on the defensive end. Big performance on that end for him. Okay performance from him on the offensive side of the ball. He continues to be one of the highest scoring sophomores. I think he still is the highest scoring sophomore in his class. So very excited for the future with Grady Dick. Next up, we will talk Ochai Agbaji, who had a fantastic game. He had a huge bounce back. The night previous against the Lakers, he only had 8 points, kind of looked invisible. Last night, he was awesome. He had a number of sweet dunks. He had great drives. He was 4 of 5 from 3. He was handling the ball, crossovers, all sorts of stuff. Really exciting game from him, where you look at him and instead of thinking like, oh, I can't believe we wasted a first-round pick on this guy, which is the prevailing attitude during the summer, now it's the opposite. It's like, how did we get this guy? What were they thinking letting this guy leave the Jazz? He's really blossomed and taken advantage of the opportunities that have been given to him. And credit to the coaching staff for coaching this guy up, because he has taken a huge leap that he did not take in Utah. 22 points, 9 of 12 shooting, 4 of 5 from 3, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, a block, and only 1 turnover. Magnificent performance. You're starting to see a rotation player for a playoff caliber team. This is no longer just small sample size theater. You're starting to get a big enough, a meaty enough section of the season where you can look at this and be like, could this be him for the remainder of his career? I am so happy with the development that he's been able to make this season. Next up, Yakob Purtle. Yakob Purtle had a good game, although he was hampered by fouls. He fouled out of this game, which I'm not surprised because he was guarding Domantas Sabonis for the majority of the game. He is just a smart player who makes the right play, organizes the Raptors defense, grabs rebounds, pushes guys out of the paint. Domantas Sabonis is, of course, one of the best offensive rebounders in the league, and Yakob Purtle is very good at clearing the paint, making sure that he does not sneak in and grab offensive rebounds. He's a steadying force, and one thing that is very notable is just how well he screens for players, especially RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett, I'm sure, loves using Yakob Purtle screens. It really helps him get to what he's good at, which is getting into the paint. And yeah, the screens that he sets are just fantastic. There are a lot of bigs in the league. They set these really wimpy screens and then run to the basket hoping for a pass so that they can get a layup. The process is different for Yakob Purtle. You can screen with him, then you can re-screen. He had an amazing screen where he completely wiped out, I believe it was Malik Monk. Malik Monk hit the Yakob Purtle screen like a brick wall and went flying, and then Yakob Purtle got the ball, drove the ball inside, and scored. What can you say about him? If you watch the game and you notice what he's doing, the guy is doing the right thing most of the time. If you're paying attention, you're liking what you see from him, because sometimes the stat line doesn't tell the whole story. He had 13 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 1 block, and yes, 4 turnovers and 6 fouls. So not the most amazing stat line, but when you watch the game, you can see what he brings to the table. It is something that doesn't always show up in the box score, and I think that he has just done a really good job for the Toronto Raptors this season. And next up, we will talk Davion Mitchell, who had an interesting game. I'm not going to say he had a great game. He didn't have the revenge game that I was hoping for, but he was really good on defense, and he really, really got into the guards of the Sacramento Kings. And the Sacramento Kings have kind of a murderer's row of really strong offensive guards. Fox, Monk, DeRozan, those guys are very talented scorers. And Davion Mitchell, he covered all of them, and he did a really good job on all of those guys. He had a very nice play where he picked, I believe it was DeRozan's pocket at half court, and then drove into the lane on the fast break, tossed it back to Ochai Agbaji, who got a fast break slam. Just really impressive defense from him. On offense, it's a completely different story because the Toronto Raptors are missing lead guards. Of course, RJ Barrett can be that and has been that for them, but he can't do everything. So they've had to lean a little bit on Davion Mitchell in that role, and he's just not very good at it. He had a number of turnovers last night. There's the very famous one that you've been watching over and over and over again if you've been watching Raptors games this season, where he kind of drives into the paint and just sort of blindly tosses the ball, hoping that it'll make it to somebody on the perimeter. He had 5 turnovers last night, which is not very good. He kind of made up for it. So 5 turnovers, 5 steals. Those two kind of cancel each other out. But yeah, on offense, he's being asked to do more than he should. He should be playing off ball most of the time. If you were to ask me, I would honestly rather have Grady Dick handling the ball more often. I know it's not completely in his wheelhouse. I feel a little bit more comfortable with him having the ball in his hands than Davion Mitchell. So kind of an uneven performance from him. Next up, so now let's go to the bench, and Chris Boucher had a vintage Chris Boucher performance. Just a really fantastic game from him. He hit a ton of threes, 4 of 6 from 3, 24 points. He had dunks, layups, and ones. He was super balling, and he did the iconic Vince Carter motorcycle rev celebration, which was awesome. That one really needs to make a comeback. It's dope. Yeah, he had a great performance, and he really provided a boost for the Toronto Raptors off of the bench. This is the perfect type of team that he can go up against. They're small, they don't have a big intimidating center, he can get into the paint, and he's like a momentum player. When he starts going and the ball starts rolling down the hill, it becomes an avalanche. You can tell that if he has his confidence going, he's banging those shots, he can go inside, he can score inside, he'll give you that big lift that you need off of the bench. And he was instrumental in preventing the Kings from coming all the way back. The Kings made a big run in the third going into the fourth, closed the gap a couple of times, and Chris Boucher kind of put it further out of reach. So very good performance from him. 24 points, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, no turnovers. Really happy to see that. And he really provides energy, and you can tell when you watch the bench react to what he does. He really gives everybody a jolt of energy, which is exactly what you want coming off of the bench. Next up, Jamison Battle. Huge bounce back game from Jamison Battle. He had 9 points. He was 3 of 6 from the field, 3 of 6 from 3. So he banged a bunch of shots and helped, as I said, the bench continue to keep pace, keep the Sacramento Kings off of the Raptors' back. And when a specialist is doing their thing, in his case, hitting threes, then, it puts a smile on your face. They're doing their job. Everything else that he can do on top of that is gravy. He brings other little intangibles that aren't quite as important as his main skill, but when you're 3 of 6 from 3, it really makes you appreciate the other stuff that player can bring to the table, as long as that standard is being met. Next up, we have Jonathan Mogbo, who I think did a good job playing with energy, playing with force, grabbing offensive rebounds. He had 5 offensive rebounds, and this is the perfect game for him, again, because if you don't have a rim protecting center, a paint clearing center, a big body to push guys out of the paint like the Kings do not have, that's where energy bigs dominate. So we saw that the Raptors a couple of seasons ago. They didn't have a real center. This is what happens when you don't have a real center. Energy guys, smaller bigs on other teams who just out effort you, will run into the paint and just grab rebounds. And he did that. Unfortunately for him, he fouled out of the game, just like Yakob Purtle. Of course, Mogbo fouled Sabonis a bunch, and he got kicked out of the game because DeMar DeRozan did his little foul hunting routine on him. He needs to be better than that. He's a rookie, so it's understandable why that was kind of tough for him. He was the highest plus-minus player on the team. He was plus 17. What is a pleasure is to have an energy big who plays the right way. And the Raptors had an energy big who kind of played the wrong way and was kind of talented enough to make it work. And I'm, of course, referring to Precious Achiuwa, who gave a spark but committed so many mistakes that any of the positives that he brought to the table were kind of offset in the other direction by some of the dumb mistakes. And Mogbo really doesn't do that. I think that he plays a much cleaner brand of basketball. He's not trying to do too much. He likes to handle the ball a little bit, but I don't feel scared like I did when I watched Precious Achiuwa. I think that he's continuing to develop and he looks like a solid player. Would love to just continue seeing him get minutes at that backup center spot. Next up, Jamal Shead. Jamal Shead has had a couple of rough games in a row. He wasn't very good in the Lakers game. He wasn't very good last night. Rookie struggles. Yeah, I'd like to see him bounce back. Hopefully he can do it next game. And lastly, we're going to talk Jacoby Walter, who had a pretty quiet night, 0 points in 10 minutes. He missed his only shot, and then he missed 2 free throws. And if Grady Dick's season last year taught me anything, it's to not get too high or low on these raw freshman guys coming out of college. You got to give them time. You got to let them work through their mistakes. He's still bringing it on the defensive end, which is very encouraging. He's getting up into guys. He had 2 rebounds. He has hustle plays. He jumps on loose balls. I'm happy with his effort level, but of course it would be very nice to see him be able to hit some of his shots. Hopefully his shoulder is not still bothering him. But yeah, that was a very encouraging game. I'm glad that the Raptors aren't stuck on 1 win anymore. And to all the tankers out there, let's relax. The Raptors are still 2-5. They're still right in the hunt for Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, etc. A lot of the quote-unquote bad teams that were supposed to be bad this year are playing better than you would assume they would be, like the Brooklyn Nets and the Charlotte Hornets. They look pretty good this year, so it's not like the Toronto Raptors are going to completely fall out of the hunt. But in terms of a morale standpoint, in terms of rewarding players who are playing the right way, a win here and there does a lot to buoy spirits. You don't want guys to only have moral victories. You want them to be able to taste success when they play well, because it'll encourage them to continue to play the right way. And the Raptors do have a lot of young talent on the team. They have a lot of guys that they want to develop. And if they can win every now and then through good effort, good communication and teamwork, that should be applauded. That should not be something that you just take for granted or even curse because it's moving you down the standings on Tankathon or whatever. The Toronto Raptors, of course, honored Vince Carter, and he did a very nice thing. He went back into the dressing room after the Toronto Raptors won the game and celebrated with them. So that was a nice touch. I think that he showed a lot of class and dignity. It's a really fitting and very nice thing that the Toronto Raptors were able to come away with a win in a game where Vince Carter was being honored. It was kind of the cherry on top of a very good evening. And moving to the next game, the Toronto Raptors play the Denver Nuggets again, this time, of course, in Denver, tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. So that should be a fun one. The Raptors made it a close game against the Nuggets the first time around. The Nuggets are still very wobbly, but they're playing mile high in Denver. It's going to be tough for the Toronto Raptors to walk away with a victory in that one. But again, I'm looking for process, not results. I want them to have another exciting game, more growth from the young players, more scoring punch from RJ Barrett. I'm looking forward to watching all of these games, which is something that I wasn't able to say at the end of last season. Even though I watched all of the games, it was kind of a slog to get through them. This year is completely different. It's always exciting to watch this team play. Even with all of the injuries that they have, watching Grady Dick and RJ Barrett kind of go bucket for bucket is really satisfying to watch. So hopefully they can keep it up. Hopefully they can make it competitive in Denver. And anyway, that is the video. Thank you for watching. I hope that you took something away from it. What did you think about the Raptors' second victory on the season? Were you moved by the Vince Carter tribute? What are your thoughts on Domantas Sabonis? Please let me know here in the comments and also on Twitter, where you can reach me at Raps Report. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.